The Adani Group is in the news again, and it's because of another investigation report.
The Guardian has accused the conglomerate of stock manipulation. It says the Adani Group secretly invested hundreds of millions of dollars into the Indian stock market and bought its own shares.
And honestly, I didn't want to do this story at first because at this point, it's become such a polarizing issue that on the one hand, you have people who believe that these reports are a concerted attempt by some foreign nationals to destabilize India's progress. And on the other hand, you have people looking at these reports and calling for Mr. Adani's head. And I feel like there's no middle ground anymore. So I put it off. I didn't want to talk about it. But then I also felt like most people debating the issue have neither read the investigation reports nor have they read Adani's response. Like they're only talking about motives and nothing else. So after a bit of thinking, I changed my mind. I wanted to do this story not to please any one side, but to actually lay down the facts. See if there's an objective way to discuss all this without the mudslinging and the abuse. But before I get there, I think I need to give you a quick recap. So earlier this year, Hindenburg Research, a short seller, decided to publish a very extensive report on the Adani Group, accusing them of pretty much everything. Share price manipulation, intimidation, defrauding the Indian public, corruption. And once the report went public, Adani stocks took a beating. It became a massive talking point, both for the opposition and the Indian media.
सरकार नहीं चाहती और सरकार डरी हुई है कि पार्लियामेंट में अदानी जी के बारे में डिस्कशन हो जाए.
Even the Supreme Court took cognizance of the issue and directed SEBI to investigate the allegations. Meanwhile, the Adani Group had to quickly change tracks. They pared down their debt, they scaled down their ambitious expansion plans, and it almost seemed like the business group would emerge from this crisis relatively unscathed until a new report came out last week. Now, this report comes from a group called OCCRP. It's a global network of investigative journalists whose stated goal is to uncover organized crime and corruption. And in this report, they make some new allegations against Adani that were previously mere speculations. Now, one of the allegations goes back to almost a decade ago. In 2012, Adani commissioned a thermal power station in Maharashtra. The very next year, they commissioned another power plant in Rajasthan, and they were already setting up a transmission company on the side as well. These were extremely ambitious projects, and the company had to import a lot of equipment from outside agencies. And some of the vendors responsible for providing this equipment were based out of countries like China and South Korea. And here's where things get interesting. Now, these vendors did not transact with the Adani Group directly. Instead, they first signed a contract with a UAE-based agency called Electrogen Infra. Electrogen Infra then sent an invoice to Adani Group for the same equipment. But in doing so, they marked up the value of the equipment by as much as 220%. Now, I know this is weird, but let's recap that for a second. In simple words, Electrogen Infra was buying equipment from foreign vendors, say 100 rupees worth of stuff, and then selling the same equipment to Adani for nearly 320 rupees. Now, who is this Electrogen Infra? Well, to understand this, you have to look at an investigation from about 10 years ago. Back then, the Department of Revenue Intelligence began investigating this very strange transaction. They were looking at this unusual UAE-based company to see if there was any foul play. And according to them, this was a dummy company. It served no purpose whatsoever. It was simply an intermediary, and even though the invoices were channeled through Electrogen Infra, the actual goods were directly sent to India. Their investigation also revealed something else. During the course of these transactions, Electrogen used Indian banks to facilitate the flow of funds. And while furnishing information to the banks, they revealed something. Look at the last line in this declaration form. It's addressed to IDBI Bank, and it mentions the name of Vinod Adani, Gautam Adani's brother. And once they came in possession of this letter, they were convinced that the Emirati company was also owned by the Adani Group. But wait, there's a problem here. Adani is importing equipment from this UAE-based company by overpaying for it. Okay, that much is understood. But how is Adani gaining from this transaction? How are they making money if they're the only ones paying for it? Well, to understand this, you have to understand how electricity tariffs are set in India. Now, when you pay for electricity, this money should compensate power generators adequately. Companies like Adani Power. Otherwise, they'll be out of business and we'll have power shortages. But how do we know if they're compensated fairly? Well, one way to do this is to look at their cost structure, the fixed costs, the variable costs, everything, and then add all of these costs together and pay something on top. So if the cost of equipment is higher, then you have to pay a higher tariff. The higher tariff is eventually borne by the government and the consumers, not Adani. So here's what's happening. Adani overpays for the equipment. This money goes to Vinod Adani's entity and they recover this cost and more from the Indian public. This is why the Department of Revenue Intelligence issued 3 show cause notices to the Adani-owned companies between 2014 and 2016. They believed that this was an elaborate ploy to defraud the Indian public. They initiated a massive investigation to implicate Adani Group and its promoters. In fact, they even wrote to SEBI explaining why there could be merit in investigating the group. But all of this happened many years ago, and I found most of this stuff from news articles published during the same time. So what does the new investigation report actually reveal then? Well, the new report effectively closes the loop. See, we only talked about how Adani Group allegedly made money by over-invoicing the equipment, but we never asked what happened to that money. Even the Department of Revenue Intelligence stopped short of fully tracing the flow of funds. In their letter to SEBI, they write that there are indications that this money went from Dubai to Mauritius and eventually made its way back to India. But there's nothing there to suggest that they knew definitively what happened to the money, because what happens in Mauritius stays in Mauritius. But the thing is, the reporters from OCCRP actually figured out what happened to this money, and that's what the new report shed lights on. So here's what happened. The funds moved out of Electrogen Infra from Dubai to another company called Electrogen Holdings based in Mauritius. This is when the trail went dark last time around. But then it seems that Vinod Adani lent about $100 million from the holding company's kitty to another Mauritius company called Ascent Trade and Investments. He owned both companies, so he's both the borrower and the lender. After lending the money, the funds moved out of Ascent to Asia Vision Fund, and the Asia Vision Fund invested its proceeds into the Global Opportunities Fund, which in turn invested significant sums of money in Indian stocks, mostly Adani companies. So the new report categorically claims that the money Adani Group made by over-invoicing equipment back in the day eventually made itself back into India and Adani stocks through a web of Mauritius-based company. And the new investigations also reveals another similar connection. If you read through the Hindenburg report on Adani from a few months ago, they were pretty much alleging the same thing when they said that money moves out of Adani companies and eventually makes its way back into Adani stocks as investor money. And in their report, they had noted suspicious trading patterns among several Mauritius funds that seemingly took large positions in Adani stocks without adequately diversifying their position. Now, they alleged that these funds were acting on behalf of the Adani Group, that they were artificially inflating the stock price, but the Adani Group was behind it all. But they never had any concrete evidence to back up the fact that these funds were in fact controlled by the Adani Group until now. See, the investigators in the latest report found at least 2 funds that were ultimately controlled by key associates of Adani. A Taiwanese individual, Chang Chung Ling, and a gentleman by the name of Nazar Ali Shaban Ali from the UAE. These individuals have previously held positions in Adani Group companies, and the report alleges that they were directly involved in trading Adani stocks. There's also another elephant in the room. SEBI regulations prevent promoters and its group from owning more than 75% of the stock. But if you assume that these funds were also owned and controlled by people close to the Adani Group, then they would be in breach of these regulations. SEBI could technically delist the stock, remove them from the stock markets. And one other thing, even though the Department of Revenue Intelligence requested SEBI to investigate the matter back in 2014, SEBI seemingly dropped it soon after. The reporters tried to reach SEBI for a comment, but they received no response either. And once I finished going through the allegations, I realized that this wasn't just a report talking about Adani's wrongdoing. This was also an indictment of India's market regulator. This was big, and I was waiting for Adani's response, and there it was. Now, Adani did not elaborate on any of the allegations. Instead, they pointed to a ruling from the Indian authorities. See, the latest report primarily relies on the previous DRI investigation on over-invoicing. But Adani was cleared in that matter all the way back in 2017. The presiding officer in that case made a compelling argument for why he didn't think Adani companies did any wrong. According to him, even though the UAE company had inflated the cost of equipment before selling it to the Adani Group, he believed the pricing was justified acquired since this company offered extended warranties. And as a consequence, he believed that the extra price was worth it. He also noted that Vinod Adani's involvement in all of this was inconsequential since these transactions were done at arm's length, that there was no quid pro quo. So the adjudicating authority gave a clean check to the Adani Group. The Department of Revenue Intelligence then appealed the matter. They even took it all the way to the Supreme Court, and even the Supreme Court refused to overturn this decision. So they're right, this is a closed matter. But what about the funds that made their way back into Adani stock? Isn't that worth investigating? Well, that's SEBI's job. It's up to them to figure out if Adani did in fact break rules regarding maximum shareholder limits. But by the looks of it, it doesn't seem as if SEBI feels like there's a lot of wrongdoing either. Because while SEBI is yet to file its report with the Supreme Court, the rumor is that they have only found minor technical breaches from Adani's end. And while it may impose a monetary penalty, it is unlikely that it will have a massive impact on Adani Group companies. And finally, it seems like Adani and its supporters are even more combative this time around. They've already found connections to George Soros, they're voicing their opinion on Twitter, and they believe that this attack is an orchestrated attack on India. So that's where the whole thing stands right now. Depending on who you want to believe, you can come to very different conclusions after listening to all of this. Is Adani perpetrating one of the biggest stock market scams in the 21st century, or is this a witch hunt against Indian businessmen and the country? You tell me. Until then, I hope you liked this video, and if you did, don't forget to like, subscribe and comment on this channel. We're trying to reach 50,000 subscribers by the end of this month, so we need to pick up the pace. Also, we are able to do these videos thanks to Ditto, our insurance advisory business, and if you haven't checked it out, please do check it out right now. It doesn't matter if you have insurance or if you're looking to buy one. The first thing you do is talk to an insurance expert and see how you can optimize for your insurance needs. Maybe you need something, maybe you don't, but it doesn't hurt getting a second opinion. We've also advised over 200,000 customers so far, and we don't charge a single rupee for the service. It's free and we don't spam you. And if you finally want to buy something, we will help you with everything, right from the applications to the claims. So check out Ditto and the link in the description box below if you want to buy a health or a term insurance policy. And yeah, that's it from me this week. I will see you next week. Until then, bye bye.